Now that we've been able to import the data into Mosaic, we've seen how we can personalize the infoscape, how we can drill in and drill out to various parts of our database. It makes sense now to enrich that by adding some analytics. And now we're going to look at that in terms of the simple functionality that you have available in Mosaic, and later on we'll look at some of the more sophisticated ways of analysis. We determine a new calculation in Mosaic by right-clicking and defining a new attribute. And in this wizard you have a number of options. A simple attribute, which we'll look at now. A summary attribute, which again we'll look at now. Formula, classification and case differentiation, which we'll look at a bit later on. Let's take simple attributes. There are a number of different things you can do here. You can either assign numbers to objects. This could be done for auditing purposes. Or you could effectively duplicate an attribute. You could put a fixed value for yes and no. For example, again, for audit purposes, you might decide to say, yes, I've looked at this attribute, or I've looked at this number of records. What I personally like is the undefined attribute. I'm going to create one of those now. This effectively brings an empty cell into your database. And what I'm going to do here is call this quarter classification. And what this will allow me to do is manually choose any of the cells in Mosaic and label them what I want. So for example, I'm going to choose January, February and March, drill in, click there and label this Q1. I'm going to do the next quarter, Q2, and then Q3, and when I zoom out, by default the remainder is Q4. As you can see, I've just created my own classification here. So when I drill into Q1, we can see that we get January, February and March. And now that I've got this new attribute in the database, we can start to run calculations off this new attribute. So it's just a good way of summing up certain parts of the data on an ad hoc basis. This does not affect the source database, this is just your Mosaic database. The next attribute we can show you is the summary attribute. Here again you have two options. The summary of one attribute, such as the count, or the summary of two attributes. So for example, you can do the sum of the amount invested in each asset. I can select interpret missing values as 0. I can also determine at this point whether I want the calculations to be automatic, once after data loading, on a manual basis, or once on definition. I'm going to leave it to automatic. I can choose where I want to insert this attribute, and I can determine as to whether it's coupled or not. Now I'll come to coupling a bit later on. But all I have to do now is say new attribute, and as you can see, we have the sum of investment in each product straight away. Because the calculations are automatic, if I drill into Q1, our predetermined classification, we can see that these have all changed and they've been recalculated automatically. What I'm going to do now is define another attribute. Summary, but this time the sum of one attribute. Now what I want to try and find out here is how many trades we've done over the whole portfolio. So I'm going to choose count from the list, and I'm going to choose the key, because the key is a unique identifier, and the unique identifier in this case is a deal. New attribute. We've done 4,995. Now how many of those are bonds? 399. But again, if I simply click here, I can redefine this attribute and say show me the count of the key by asset, redefine the attribute. Now I've got a split of our trades. And I can really reiterate this as many times as I want. I can also do percentage shares. So for example here, instead of showing in true values, I can show in percentage values the percentage sum of the amount invested in each product. I can insert this attribute after my previous calculation. And now we get in percentage terms exactly how much money we've invested in each asset type. And again, if I go to Q1, these all recalculate. So I can see that in Q1, almost 21% of my investments were in CDSs, which equated to around 300 transactions. In terms of Bank of America, 52% of my business with Bank of America was done in CDS.